Velkommen til Vestkast episode 11. Denne episoden er nummer 3 i vår serie om bryggerpresentasjoner, og er et intervju med Steve Hindy, grunnleggeren av Brooklyn Brewery i New York, USA. Vestkast er sponset av Vestbrygg og Pingvinen, og redigeres i Spacecraft Studio.
So I'm Steve Hindy. I'm founder and chairman of Brooklyn Brewery. I started the company in 1988. We started selling beer, and I got into beer in a kind of unusual way. I used to be a journalist for Associated Press. I was based in Beirut in the late 70s, early 80s. And I covered a lot of big stories. I was in Iran during the revolution and the hostages, and I was with the Iraqi army when they invaded Iran. And we had the wars in Lebanon, the Israeli war in '82, and the massacres in the refugee camps. I covered those stories. And I moved to Cairo, and I was sitting behind President Sadat when he was killed at the parade in '81. So a lot of big stories. But when I was there, I met American diplomats who had worked in Saudi Arabia, where they have Islamic law, no alcoholic beverages. And these guys were avid homebrewers. So I was introduced to homebrew in Cairo, Egypt. And then my wife, who was with me through much of this, decided she'd had enough of being the wife of a war correspondent, and said she was going home and taking our children, and she hoped that I would join her, but if not, bye-bye. So I gave it up. I came back to New York, which it was disappointing to me because I loved what I was doing. But in retrospect, I think she did me a favor. Because when I came back, I started making beer at home. I went to work for a newspaper in New York, Newsday, doing foreign news for them, and I was not really happy. It was a real letdown from what I'd been doing in the Middle East, being an editor at a newspaper as opposed to being a reporter and a writer. But I had always had a dream to start a business, even though I had no business experience. And so eventually my neighbor in Brooklyn and I decided to start Brooklyn Brewery based on, my hobby of home brewing. And so we did that. We raised $500,000 from colleagues and friends. Neither of us is wealthy. We started selling beer in New York. And it's amazing what's happened since then, to be selling beer in Europe and Asia and South America, Australia. It's just been an incredible experience.
Could you just give us the short story of craft brew industry in the States from 88 till now?
Well, I think really the earliest craft brewers started in the late 70s. Actually the first, if really the sort of the grandfather of the whole movement, is a guy named Fritz Maytag, whose family is very wealthy. He bought a failing brewery in San Francisco in 1965 called the Anchor Brewery. And he revived this old style of brewing with 100% malt, no rice or corn additive. And then in the late 70s, there was a guy named Jack McAuliffe who had been in the U.S. Navy based in the UK, and he'd gotten interested in real ale when he was in the UK. So he started a brewery called New Albion, a microbrewery it was called at the time. And that whole first generation of craft brewers, most of them had traveled in Europe, tasted what good beer could be. They traveled in Scandinavia or Germany or the UK or Belgium and wondered, why can't we make beer like this in the U.S.? Because most American beers were made with corn or rice and were fairly bland. They were mass market beers, very successful beers and technically very, very high quality beers, but not much flavor. So I think European brewing traditions kind of inspired the whole craft beer movement in the U.S. When I started in '88, there were about fewer than 50 craft breweries in America. Today, 27 years later, there are more than 4,000 breweries in America. So the whole craft movement has really caught hold in the U.S.
But has the homebrew scene also developed parallel with this? Or?
Well, I think there's no real statistic about how many craft brewers started as homebrewers, but I think it's a big number. I mean, I think it might be 80 or 90% of the craft brew founders started as homebrewers. And yes, there is a very active homebrew culture in America. I think there are between 1 and 2 million homebrewers now in the U.S. And our association, our Craft Brewers Association, has an arm for the American Homebrewers Association. So we remain connected to homebrewers in the U.S. and they are very supportive of our efforts in the U.S.
And your brewery, Brooklyn Brewery, has quite a success, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, of course, people ask me, did I ever imagine it would get this big? And hell yes. I wanted to have a significant company. But it is a surprise to me that, we're selling beer in Oslo or Trondheim or Stockholm. A surprise and a thrill for me. And I think that it didn't happen really through any genius on our part. We were just in the right place at the right time in New York, almost from the beginning. When we were struggling to get established here in New York, we had people coming to us from Sweden, from the UK, from Australia, wanting to sell Brooklyn in those countries. And, I remember saying to people, wow, we're having trouble selling it here in New York because it's a very new idea, and you want to sell it in Japan or in Sweden. So in the beginning, we just said, okay, we'll send you beer, but you have to pay us first because, we were very short on cash. And that's not a good deal for the importer. It's a good deal for us, but we didn't have time for anything else. And then over the years, the brand caught on around the world, and we became a kind of global craft brewer, which now is a very significant part of our business.
I heard a story that when you started here in Brooklyn, truck drivers didn't want to drive here in night.
Yeah, our first warehouse was in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which now is a very trendy, interesting neighborhood. It's still a little rough today, but 27 years ago, truck drivers would not come to Bushwick after dark. It was very high crime and, not a nice area. It's interesting. In the beginning, a lot of people, including lifelong Brooklyn people, questioned naming the beer Brooklyn. They said, the image is not so good of Brooklyn, crime and poverty. And, we said, we believe in Brooklyn. It's an amazing place. It's a rough place, but, a lot of interesting people have come from Brooklyn. And we think it lives in the imagination of people all over the world because of all the immigrants that have come through Brooklyn.
A lot of Norwegians too.
Yes, there was a huge Norwegian community in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which, still you see a lot of Norwegian names out that way. And I think Norwegians in general have a good connection with New York. I have a place up in Maine, in the state of Maine, actually Brooklyn, Maine. And we're redoing our kitchen there. And I went to this guy who sells granite, because they have granite quarries in Maine. Actually, the granite in the Brooklyn Bridge came from Deer Isle, Maine. And the guy who runs the quarry business is named Steve Thoner, and he's a Norwegian American. Very interesting guy with an amazing business selling granite all over the world.
So maybe we should talk a little bit about your Scandinavian operations, because you started in Stockholm and now also Trondheim, isn't that right?
Yeah. Actually, another interesting Norwegian connection. The building we're in right now, the headquarters of Brooklyn Brewery, the brewery is on one block, and across the street is our warehouse. These two blocks were part of an iron foundry in the 19th century called the Hekla Ironworks, named for a volcano in Iceland. And the man who ran the Hekla Ironworks was a Norwegian-American entrepreneur. So there are a lot of connections with Norway here in New York. Yes, we do have a partnership with Carlsberg in Stockholm, in Sweden, and also in Norway. And together we're building craft breweries, not to produce Brooklyn beers, but to produce, Swedish and Norwegian craft beer. So in Stockholm, it's called the New Carnegie Brewery. It's a revival of an old Swedish brand, the Carnegie Brewery. And in Trondheim, Norway, it's the E.C. Dahl's brewery, which is a well-known local brewery in Trondheim. That we're going to be developing a line of craft beers with that brand. So that's very exciting for us, and I think there are other opportunities that we're going to be developing together with Carlsberg in Europe. Yeah.
But Carlsberg is reckoned as a big industrial brewery.
Yeah. Yes, Carlsberg is the number 4 brewery in the world. I think there's a big difference between the top 2 and the next 2, Heineken and Carlsberg. The top 2 are much, much larger. We like Carlsberg because they treat us as an equal. So Carlsberg doesn't own any of Brooklyn Brewery. We don't own any of Carlsberg. Also, most people don't recognize that Carlsberg is controlled by a not-for-profit foundation, the Carlsberg Foundation, dedicated to science and art. And a third of the profits of the company go into scientific research and developing art, buying art, and funding big art projects. So we think that company culture makes Carlsberg very similar to our culture, which is very much about developing community and being involved in the communities where we sell beer, supporting arts projects and not-for-profit organizations. It's a big part of our culture, and we found that Carlsberg has a similar culture. So we're comfortable with working with Carlsberg.
So you're not selling out?
No, That's not part of any plan. A lot of our colleagues, I don't know if you've been following here in the U.S., many craft breweries are selling out. The Lagunitas Brewery recently sold 50% to Heineken, and there have been about 6 small breweries that have sold to Anheuser-Busch InBev. And we have been approached by Anheuser-Busch InBev and by Heineken and by others, but their only way of working with us would be to buy us, and we don't agree with that. Carlsberg is willing to treat us as an equal, and we're comfortable with that. And, you know, the cooperation with Carlsberg is mainly in Europe, where they have a lot of strength.
Yeah, we see these things happen in Norway as well with Nøgnø, as I presume you know about.
Yeah, were they bought by someone?
They were bought by a pretty big brewery called Hansa. Right. Hansa Borg, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, these are businesses, and I think no one should be surprised to hear that you know, a brewery is selling to a larger brewery. I mean, that's been happening for centuries. We think there's some value in remaining independent and being able to chart our own course and follow our own, you know, our own dream, and that's where we are with Brooklyn Brewery.
Do you have any thoughts about the future of the craft industry in the States?
Well, you know, the number of breweries that have sold to the big guys is small compared to the number of breweries. You know, maybe 10 or 15 breweries have made deals. There are another 4,000 breweries still. So, and more coming, yeah, for sure. So I think we're at the beginning of this. I don't think you can really say what's going to happen for the future, except it's clear that craft beer with flavor, is going to be a big part of the future of beer. You know, for the big breweries and for the small breweries, craft beer is here to stay. Whether it becomes, you know, 20% or 30% or 50% of the market, I don't know, but I think it's going to grow because I think people who love beer, I think, find craft beer to be much more interesting and much more satisfying to their taste than mass market beer. Craft beer is not just about drinking, you know, 10 beers on Friday night. It's about picking the right beer for the right moment, for the right meal, and the right company. And, you know, that's not always the same beer. So I feel that craft beer enriches people's appreciation of beer. And I love being part of that.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome, Rolf. Good luck. Thank you.
Ja, det var vår lille prat med Steve Hindy. Dette intervjuet ble tatt opp før jul i Brooklyn, New York. Og var altså da episode 3 i vår serie om bryggerpresentasjoner. Vi er som vanlig sponset av Vestbrygg, som du finner på vestbrygg.no, og Pingvinen, som du finner på pingvinen.no. Husk at du kan følge oss på både Twitter og Facebook. Har du spørsmål, tips eller forslag, så kan du sende en e-post til vestkast@gmail.com. Denne episoden er redigert i Spacecraft Studio, og mitt navn er Rolf Bergesen.